Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Got it. Noted.
It's great to see so many people sharing my enthusiasm for this subject, which I'm learning a lot about with you. In fact, many of you know much more about it than I do. We're going to go ahead and start with a little housekeeping and background information on our committee right now. And we're expecting Governor Dannel Malloy to be here in about 10 minutes. So I'm Mark Robbins. I'm co-chair of the CTGBC Homes Committee. The other chairwoman, Elizabeth DeSalvo, she'll raise her hand. She's an architect, so she's the chairman of the committee. Welcome to Energy and Environmental Innovations. This is a 4-part series brought to you by our committee. The CTGBC is a nonprofit volunteer-based chapter of the United States Green Building Council, best known for its LEED Green Building Certification Program, which stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. And the timing of this series was inspired by Connecticut's recent adoption of a comprehensive energy strategy. Our 4-part program synthesizes innovations from both private and public sectors. The forums are platforms for regional collaboration among towns of Lower Fairfield County, and they're intended to facilitate a dialogue and participation in innovative new clean energy programs, including those developed by DEEP and CEFIA. Our primer program, the first talk, if you will, took place last month, and it was titled Breakthroughs in Energy Legislation. And this is Energy and Infrastructure Solutions, to be followed next month by Building Energy Now. The title's intentionally a little bit vague because we're still building the panel. And we're going to sum up this year in May with a program titled Sustainable Planning and Operation. So tonight we will have a keynote speaker, followed by a fast-paced series of presentations by our esteemed panelists here. And we'll close with audience Q&A. I thank you all for coming. I especially want to thank the new Canaan High School staff and our committee that's been working feverishly as volunteers to pull this group together. And I would ask that everyone please make sure you have signed up, registered, and that we've captured your email. And we're going to use that platform to invite you to our future events. I'll briefly introduce our speakers. To my left is Alex Kragie. He's a Deputy Chief of Staff for DEEP, Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And we're going to hear from him what he's doing to facilitate the objectives of Connecticut's comprehensive energy strategy. Next to him, to his left, is David Bartlett from IBM. And he's going to speak about buildings as an interactive part of a dynamic system and how instrumentation informs the future. To his left is Andy Skok from FuelCell Energy, and we're going to hear about fuel cells as a unique component of the distributed generation ensemble, homegrown power when and where you need it. Keep in mind that the program was initially scheduled to happen the week of Sandy, so this was all extremely relevant at the time. And the comprehensive energy strategy was out for public comment. So the initial thought was that we were going to seek and force comment out of the audience, but now it's been adopted. We're here to celebrate that. And finally, Joe Camean, an engineer and good friend of mine, and he's going to speak about what I have as a novice dubbed community energy, which is to say, looking at our current condition and bringing to us lessons from abroad. I'd say that he's really a purist and quite bipartisan and agnostic when it comes to equipment. He's not going to defend any particular invention or method of generation, but he's going to give us a perspective on how to incorporate all the energy that's produced. And he's really, I think, what my takeaway is that he sees heat as the unsung and undervalued component in the fight for energy independence. So that said, I am inclined to start with Alex, who actually, he's so good at this, and I want to share with you that I went up to a microgrid conference when I was running for office, running for state rep in the fall. And I thought I walked into the wrong room. I saw Alex standing there and everybody was clapping at everything he said. I thought it was stand-up comedy. So I walked out. They said, no, this is the microgrid conference. So I said, okay, well, this would be kind of fun to bring him to meet all of you tonight. So with that, Alex Kragie.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to everybody for being here. This is a real treat, just as it was last time. I can't believe you invited me back, especially after the dent that I put into your sandwich platter last time and did again tonight. Sorry about that, Mark. But I am really pleased to be here with you tonight and speaking on a topic that matters really a lot to all of us. What I'd like to do, if you'll indulge me, is talk a little bit about our department, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection's broader constructs and what we're trying to do. That will allow me to very politely and quietly walk away from the microphone when my boss shows up, and so I can let him speak. And then I'll get to talk about microgrids, which is what I really want to engage you all in, a really in-depth conversation. But it's important that we let the governor have his time and respect that. So what we're trying to do at the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and I went into this a little bit at the last event we were having here together, but I'll go into it again, is we're really trying to accomplish, to deliver on the governor's vision of cheaper, cleaner, and more reliable energy. And this is a difficult task by any measure, because generally you have cheaper states and you have cleaner states, and they're usually divided by colors red and blue. But what this governor and what this legislature really tried to do with a big piece of legislation that we passed in 2011 was to really try and take that hard middle road. It's easy to pick one side, but what we're trying to do is to really drive right down the middle, and we think we can come up with solutions that deliver on that cheaper, cleaner, and more reliable energy agenda. As I said, our topic tonight is going to focus on the reliable piece, but if you'll indulge me, I'd like to touch on the cleaner and the cheaper piece before we jump into that, just so anyone who wasn't at the last session has a little bit of catch-up. We really have two major focuses at our department when it really comes down to it, and speaking broadly for the clean energy industry, we have two major focuses. We want to deliver cleaner energy, and we want to deliver cheaper energy, and the way we do that is we focus on two things. We focus on driving down the cost of clean energy, and we focus on developing breakthroughs in technologies such as battery storage and other technologies like that are going to enable us to have this clean energy future that we all want. We can't get to 100% clean energy grid until we're at grid parity in terms of cost comparisons, and we also have a way to make that clean electricity deployable in a base load fashion. This is something we're really driving at in a number of different ways. We've created a whole suite of different programs that get at this driving down the cost of clean energy. And this governor is very, very clear that that is our number one goal here, is to drive down costs in this industry and get us to this point where we need to be, which is of grid parity and then below. So we've created the LREC and the ZREC program, which some of you might have heard of. It is basically put, it's a giant reverse auction. We have a certain amount of money, and we say to the marketplace, tell me what you need to build your project. And we stack all of those answers we get up against each other, and we take the cheapest ones. So we're very pleased with the results of our first year's auction, and I think we're going to be very pleased with next year's auction as well. We actually managed to deliver a total incentive level for all the clean energy we're delivering, which should be somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 megawatts of solar and fuel cells at an average subsidy price of 9 cents per kilowatt hour. That's a real accomplishment, and that's in comparison to 22 cents in some other locations, neighbors who won't be named. It's something that we're really pleased about in terms of being able to drive down those costs. We also have been able to create the nation's first green bank, what we call our Clean Energy Finance and Investment Authority. And what this allows us to do is to drive the broad-scale deployment of clean energy through the financing of clean energy technologies. We've started to see some early successes with that, and I think you're going to see a real ramp-up of that in the near future. And then I'll start in on my more reliable focus. If you'll let me walk over here, I'll pull up Marco Rubio and go the awkward drink of water here. So we're really here to discuss reliability and what that means to us. I think the first thing I can do for everybody is to define what exactly a microgrid is. A microgrid is the concept of keeping up one small piece of the larger electricity grid in the event of a larger scale grid outage. There's pretty sound logic behind that, and it makes sense. I think everybody here can recognize that when you have a severe weather event, or God forbid, terrorist attack or something of that nature, we need to be able to have some critical facilities up and running to deliver services, to deliver core services to residents of our state. So that's the concept behind a microgrid. The way this is accomplished is that this microgrid has distributed generation on site. So that could be a fuel cell, that could be auxiliary solar panels, it could be a natural gas-fired generator, it could be a combined heat and power unit, it could be any number of things. And this distributed generation powers this microgrid in the event of the larger grid going down, and preferably is operating 24/7 to deliver baseload electricity even when the larger grid is up. But when that larger grid goes down, you snap your fingers, and this microgrid is able to disconnect thanks to a series of trips and transfers that have been installed at a point of common coupling with the utility, and it islands the power so that this power is able to be delivered while the larger grid is down without any adverse impacts on the larger grid. Now, I really want to talk a little bit more about this program here that we have constructed in Connecticut. And what really amazes me is that every single time that I'm speaking about microgrids, this concept becomes even more relevant. It's really unbelievable. Connecticut has been just battered unmercifully with storms and natural disasters over the past 3 years since Governor Malloy took office. We've had this winter. That is how I mark the time. We had the terrible winter snowstorms of 2011, which of course everybody remembers. We had Tropical Storm Irene in 2011, and we also had the Great October Snowstorm that I'm sure many of you remember, where all of us were without power for 8 days and smelled horrible, and it was very unpleasant, and it was just a miserable experience for everybody. That was very burnt into all of our memories, especially mine. Then even after that, we had the truly devastating effects of Hurricane Sandy this past year. And then, as if that's not enough, we had the Great Blizzard. It's almost as if there's a pattern emerging. The best capturing of this concept that I've heard was from, I don't know if anyone reads, it's a satirical newspaper called The Onion. They had a story that had the headline, has a young girl asking, as a 12-year-old, should I have lived through this many storms of the century by now? That's a very reasonable question to be asking. It is getting ridiculous, and we need to do something so that we can provide greater safety and reliability to the citizens of our state in these severe weather events that we're talking about. So how do you respond to such a staggering array of blows? Well, generally, the response is characterized by a number of different things, but mostly there's a great deal of noise and righteous anger, and everybody gets very upset that their power was out for a long period of time. And then time passes, a report comes back and tells you how much it would cost to underground all your wires, and everyone says, well, screw that, we're not doing that. And we all go back to status quo. Well, our governor made it very, very clear that this was not going to be how we did business in the state of Connecticut. We wanted to put something in place that would stick. And so he partnered with the General Assembly. We have Representative O'Day, Representative Steinberg here. We have, I'm sure, some other legislators. Please do raise your hand if you're here. And some number of first selectmen as well. It's great to see everybody. Governor Malloy partnered with the General Assembly to come up with a very strong storm response bill. And this bill had as a part of it a microgrid program, the first in the nation, statewide that is. So we all were very happy and had a glass of cheap champagne and clinked glasses and then suddenly realized that we were in completely uncharted territory. We had no precedent. There was no such thing as a microgrids program to base our microgrids program on. So we started making it up. And we did it in the most orderly way we possibly could. The first thing we did was we assembled a really crack team of experts. And this is the point where I should really take a moment to thank the team at the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection who works on the microgrids program with me. They're not here tonight, but the lead is Veronica Szarkowski, and there's just a fantastic team that has been working 24/7 to make this program what it is and isn't today. We put together a really strong team, and we decided that we were going to break this down into 3 steps. The first step was we were going to show our cards. We put out a request for information, as it's known in bureaucratese, and it essentially said, this is how we want to do our program. And we got a lot of responses saying, that's a terrible idea, that's a good idea. And we listened, and we structured our program in response to those responses. So that really benefited us. Our first step was to really take on input from stakeholders, and that really made our program a heck of a lot better. And it also makes it much harder for stakeholders to criticize the program when you've taken their ideas and incorporated them into it. Clever little political maneuver. So we strengthened our program in that way. The second stage, the second step of the program was we put out what we call a project feasibility application. What this essentially meant was it was a 30,000-foot level view of microgrid projects. We put this out to all of the municipalities in the state, to many private sector entities, and we said, please give us a very high-level sketch of what you would see a microgrid project in your municipality or at your private sector entity looking like. And we really had our sort of moment of truth for our microgrids program. It could have been that no projects came back and we would have packed our bags and started working on something else. It turned out that we got 36 responses, which we feel very good about. It's really just scraping the surface when you come to think about it, but it is a very promising beginning. So we got these 36 projects and we ran a technical feasibility analysis that allowed us to sort of make a binary decision. Is this a go, is it not a go? And I'm happy to say that 27 of those projects made it through that binary analysis and are going to be eligible to respond to the third part of the program, which is a final request for proposal, which Department of Energy and Environmental Protection is going to be issuing on Wednesday. And those 27 projects will be eligible to respond to that request for proposal that we're putting out on Wednesday. At the end of the day, we're going to end up with 10 to 12 winning projects, and they're going to be the best projects from the bunch that meet a whole host of criteria. We want to make sure that we have clean generation as a part of this, the cleanest possible. It's not always possible to get zero emissions generation, distributed generation of microgrids, but you can get pretty darn close. Fuel cells are a great solution. Combined heat and power, good solution. You have many different options, and you can even augment it with zero emissions technologies like solar PV and even wind if you get a little creative with it. But we do expect a really strong batch of responses to our final round RFP that we're going to be issuing on Wednesday. So we're eager to move forward. And the governor has enough confidence in this program to propose an additional $30 million in his budget, in his proposed budget, for subsequent rounds of this microgrids program. And I do feel, and I don't feel, I know that we have the capacity to make that a reality and to turn that $30 million into even more microgrids projects and even greater deployment across the state, so we can live up to the governor's vision of cheaper, cleaner, and more reliable energy. So that's really a sort of thumbnail sketch of my program. What I'm really looking forward to is engaging with you guys on the Q&A session, because last time there were fantastic questions, and I'm really eager to get everybody re-engaged this time around. So thank you guys for coming tonight, and look forward to chatting a little bit more later.
So you can see why I'm a volunteer and I don't get paid for this. I failed to read the introduction that I prepared for Alex, so that perhaps the third time I have him as a panelist, I'll do it right. But let me try to correct my error and just add that previously Alex served as vice president of the Coalition for Green Capital, CGC, a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. He also worked on the Obama-Biden transition team, which is where he picked up a lot of his humor, and served as a regional field director on the Obama campaign in 2008. Alex is a graduate of Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. So with that off my chest, I'd like to introduce our second speaker. And keep in mind that while we're only asking for a $10 donation, suggested donation tonight, at the end of the four-part series, there will be a quiz. And you'll be expected to know what and go with it, know what CHP is, know what resilience is as you defined it, come to an understanding of sustainability, which I think is an expansive philosophical debate, and most importantly, be able to articulate what is a microgrid. So, with that heads up, David Bartlett, and I promise not only humor, but to bring you some celebrities, and I'm delivering on that, not just hopefully with the governor, but by bringing you David Bartlett. He's Vice President, Smarter Physical Infrastructure at IBM. Let me tell you about David. David leads the IBM Smarter Buildings Initiative, helping clients create more green, cost-efficient cities, campuses, corporate offices, commercial sites, hospitals, and neighborhoods worldwide. It's a pretty big task. So as IBM's building whisperer, as he is known in the media, he is a vocal advocate at industry events and media for using data analysis to correct wasteful practices. We might have some of them here. David brings a unique set of capabilities to his function, stemming from 30 years of professional experience and academic training, which includes Masters in Computer Science at the University of Minnesota, MBA at the University of North Carolina, Masters in Project Management at George Washington University, and a BA in Life Science at State University of New York. So you ask, how could he possibly be qualified? With that, I'm going to pause, okay, because I think we have our guest of honor here tonight, who needs no introduction, but is certainly responsible for the genesis of the program and advancing what is, I think, the most interesting landmark legislation in connection with energy and environment, so named our series. Our governor, Dannel Malloy.
Great. Hey. How are you? Hey, how are you? Good to see you. Good to see everyone. I'm sorry I was delayed. I do apologize. So I don't know where you are in the proceedings. You're just starting, or are you at a panel? Or you're stalling. You're stalling.
Yeah,
you're doing the big stall. You've been the big stretch. Well, it's great to be with everybody. Very much appreciate the opportunity to be with you. I'm supposed to give a speech, which I'll do, on a subject that I've worked very hard on, not simply since I became governor, or for that matter ran for governor, but for a very long period of time. Because as a mayor of Stamford for 14 years, I certainly came to understand that we were at a competitive disadvantage, in large part because we didn't have an energy policy in the state of Connecticut, which led us to willingly accept having the second highest cost for electricity in the nation year after year after year, and didn't lead to the kinds of investments that needed to be made, as well as changes in policy that needed to be made that would allow us to be more competitive, as well as ultimately meeting what is my mantra, which is cleaner, cheaper, and more reliable energy being available to the residents of the state of Connecticut. And certainly doing all of that in the context of understanding that we are competing on an international basis as well as against 49 states. If all but one of those states has lower costs than we do, then we're at a competitive disadvantage. And we needed to do something about it. I did win that election, although some people are still complaining. Not myself and my wife. We decided that an issue that I'd spent a lot of time talking about during the context of that election, we would also spend a lot of time talking about in the context of an administration. I searched for a person to take over our DEEP and change it from DEEP, Department of Environmental Protection, to Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, because in our state, I think in a lot of states, but in our state in particular, those two things do go together. We are passionate in Connecticut about our environment, but we also needed to be equally passionate about our energy policies. Dan Esty came forward, was willing to take on that challenge. I was very happy when he decided to do that. We have collaborated regularly on these matters. He assembled a great team and also inherited some wonderful people at DEEP. I think we passed a landmark legislation in the spring of 2011. One of those aspects of that landmark legislation was to require the state to come forward with an energy policy, something that we simply did not have in the state of Connecticut. We worked on that diligently, making some tough decisions, but ultimately deciding that we could in fact produce cleaner, cheaper, and more reliable energy. Much has been discussed that is in that energy policy. Much of that, at least in the early discussions, revolved around I think what is a very important issue, and it's not simply the cost of electricity, but also that how many of our citizens are burning oil to heat their homes. And the things that the state of Connecticut had done literally to throw roadblocks in the way of expanded gas access to our state, and really in many ways preventing the build out of a more robust delivery system of gas to our state. Many of you know this, but I'll repeat it. We have about a 30% penetration rate in the state of Connecticut for natural gas. Natural gas is substantially cleaner. It's not a clean fuel, I'm not confused, but it is substantially cleaner than oil. We have about a 30% penetration rate in Connecticut. Rhode Island and Massachusetts are both about 50%. New Jersey is about 75%, including almost all of their industrial base being on natural gas, a competitive advantage for them, as well as an environmental advantage for them. I think after Maine, we're the second most dependent state in New England on oil for heating homes. So we've come forward with a series of recommendations with respect to how to get additional natural gas delivered to our state and delivered within our state. Not the least of which is that we need to do to play by the same rules that other states are playing by. And I'll just give you the one easiest kind of hit yourself in the forehead concept that we need to move in the direction of. In our state, for a long period of time, and I'm not sure anyone's ever given me an explanation of why, but we decided that with respect to the extension of natural gas lines, that all costs needed to be recovered from the ratepayers for that extension of line within 15 years. Now, in the other states that I've just mentioned, that's a 25 or 30-year period of time. So effectively, we made natural gas even more expensive than it would have been because we required you to pay yourself back within 15 years. Makes no sense, and it particularly makes no sense at all in a low interest rate environment, which we certainly are in and have been in for a number of years. But we go well beyond a discussion of natural gas in this plan, including a microgrid proposal, so that as well here. I've been governor for, 27 months. In our entire history, we've had 14 natural disasters declared. 5 of those since we elected that lieutenant governor. We are living in a time of substantially changing and rapidly changing environment. Microgrids are something which I fought mightily for and actually was behind the initial microgrid legislation, which had been stalled for a number of years at the legislature. Eventually got it passed, of course, only to meet further opposition on the regulatory side from the utilities. But we are investing in building out a system so that a town center like New Canaan or Wilton or Ridgefield would have access to power even if the power lines are down. That important buildings, whether it's the high school or the police station or restaurants in the downtown, would have the ability to power up and be on a separate system from one that relies on aerial lines, as so much of our state does. We're going to invest in that. In fact, we have a series of kind of an RFP out. We've gotten lots of responses, well over 30 responses, many of those coming from Fairfield County. That process will continue forward. We are putting millions of dollars in to building out a system, or at least starting to build out a system. That's in our energy plan. Another $50 million to lead by example for state government. Our first down payment was $10 million in the last budget. We're asking for $50 million, which will allow us to do some remarkable things, particularly highlighting our 10 biggest energy use centers in state government in Connecticut, and the implementation of new technologies that will allow us to control heating and electric usage in those buildings from a distance. We have lots of things in this plan that I'm sure you'll hear some more about, but this is important stuff as well. And we're also involved, separate and part of that plan, we're also involved in really, again, working on cleaner, cheaper, and less expensive energy being available in the state of Connecticut. One of the things that we did even before we put this plan out, and we have proven that it drives the cost down, is we did a reverse auction for our alternative energy purchase. I'll tell you the story about Dan Esty. I told him we needed to get a purchase made of renewable energy. We needed to do it before federal tax incentives that were available through a year ago, not this past year, a year ago, December 31st, that we needed to get an auction off the ground. He came back to me and said, I've got some news. We can't do it as quickly as you want to do it, Governor, but my staff said we could do it in 6 months, and I told them we had to do it in 3 months, and I said, that's good. You need to do it by the end of the month. And we did. And we did. And we got some of the lowest cost for alternative energy in the entire nation that year, because we required free market pressure to be applied. Instead of trying to pick winners and negotiate and pay whatever a negotiated process led to, we let competition get us to the lowest possible cost. And that's going to be an important tool to be used, not just in Connecticut, but throughout the nation as we move forward. But it's particularly important in Connecticut, where we're already paying the highest rates and simply cannot afford to pay more money for electricity in particular than the lowest possible cost for cleaner, cheaper, and more reliable energy. So there's lots of things in this plan. I'm sure you'll hear some of the others. We stand by clean energy. We want clean energy. We want the cleanest possible energy, or the cleanest possible energy at any given time that's available to us. We are engaged in discussions about, right now, as I stand before you, we have the highest renewable standard requirement in New England by 2020. And projecting forward based on how we're adapting, we're going to have a very hard time meeting that. But what we're actually doing is calling for a 25% renewable requirement within 5 years after that. And we're also looking at how do we get to that 20% as quickly as we can, understanding that the goal here is about eliminating particulate matter in the atmosphere. How do we get there as quickly as we can, at the same time that we look at different ways of getting there as well. So lots of things to discuss. I'll take a couple of questions if you want me to, before and if there are no questions, I'll give another speech. But those are a few things I wanted to say. Sure.
Yes, Governor Dannel, that's great. You came up with the Microgrid program. I feel that once it's established, we could really export that to countries where there is a blackout problem very frequently, like in the rural areas.
Yeah, and you know, the microgrids are a perfect use of fuel cell technology, which we have a real, you know, with 30% of the people working in fuel cell technology in the country are working here in Connecticut, and it's a great use of that technology. There are other possible technologies to use for microgrids, but that certainly is one of those, and I know we have a panelist who will speak to that issue, so. Potentially a compliment, I'll take that all day. How are you?
Good, thank you. You mentioned that there's a 15-year payback for line extension and
Yep.
natural gas, but the surrounding states have...
25 and 30.
Yeah. Are we doing anything to adjust?
Yeah, we're going to change it. That's what I'm doing here. That's why you supported me for governor. Yeah, we got to change it. It makes no sense. You know, and I know that, you know, oil delivery folks will say, well, you know, you're unfairly advantaging people, gas companies, if you change the rules at this point, which is just hogwash. I mean, we're not going to make anyone connect to natural gas that doesn't want to connect, but we want more people to have that choice in our state. And we also, by the way, in building out the system further, will attract additional investment for in-state or two-state delivery systems, some of which have already been proposed, some of which I've been briefed on by owners of delivery systems for natural gas via pipeline.
Well, I'm excited you're doing this. How quickly? I've made a commitment this year. I'm personally switching my household from oil to gas. But I found out what the bill's going to be to run my line, and I just about died.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Well, you know, it's easier in some places than it is in others. A lot of it depends on how far from the line you are, or in some cases how far your home is from the road. In the energy package, and I'm sure maybe you're going to talk about some of this stuff, we have specific recommendations, including, by the way, a $500 tax treatment, favorable tax treatment against your income tax requirements to the state, which we're trying to get passed this year, and a number of other ways looking at the potential of helping and financing that. But all of that depends on the legislature taking up our bill, which I think they will, by the end of, well, I guess the first week of June. Back there. How are you?
How you doing?
Good.
How easy is it to deal with natural gas? I mean, can we make deals?
It's a lot easier since I got elected governor, I'll tell you that. It's amazing. There's a turn of calls and everything. You know, I think, you know, listen, we have a large utility in CL&P, you know, that is the largest utility. They happen to be a combined utility and now a regional utility. You know, they're not happy about microgrids, but they're real happy about what we're trying to do on the natural gas side. And I think they're happy about some of the other things that we're trying to do as well, including, you know, here we are. Me standing, you sitting in this room. We could measure probably in a matter of months, I'm not talking about 5 or 6, but we could talk about how many months it will take North America to be energy independent. We never, not anyone in this room thought that was possible 10 years ago. Yet with the development of hydroelectric on the upper Churchill, a commitment by the Canadian government on the lower Churchill, additional deposits of oil being found, as well as natural gas, as well as the development of wind, as well as the development of solar, as well as the development of other technologies. North America is about to be energy independent. How do we in Connecticut tap into that and benefit from that simple fact? How do we get cheaper, cleaner, and more reliable energy in our state? And I think the utilities, they're starting slowly to think outside the box, particularly when you have a shiny object to show them and wave in front of them. And what I want to do on the natural gas side has certainly gotten their attention. There is a desire to bring a different mix of fuels to New England for energy generation. Although we have a sizable nuclear facility in the state of Connecticut, overwhelmingly, and in New Hampshire, overwhelmingly our price is set at natural gas. We're overly reliant on natural gas for production, And that's one of the reasons that I've engaged in a very open and public discussion about tapping into Canadian hydroelectric as an alternative, and quite frankly, I think a very positive alternative for our little corner of North America. Sure.
Governor, thank you for your leadership. You're moving Connecticut to the front of the country on this, and it's exciting. Speaking of the Canadian hydro, discussion underway to include it in the renewable portfolio standard, I see it poses a trade-off of reliability and resilience, increasing our dependence on long-distance transmissions lines rather than developing more distributed energy here. Could you please speak to those trade-offs?
Hey, listen, yeah, sure. I think there are trade-offs, but I also think what we're involved in is this is not a pure environment discussion, nor is it a pure economic discussion, nor can it simply depend on how many jobs get created in a small but growing industry in Connecticut, when in fact we're buying our energy in a New England marketplace. So we don't control nearly to the extent what people in Connecticut would like to believe when it comes to pricing our energy. We're in a common market, and that common market is overly dependent on a couple of fuels. And rapidly, I think, moving forward, closing its few remaining coal plants in New England. Some aged biomass plants, which aren't terribly efficient, and then a wing and a prayer and a hope. We cannot afford in the state of Connecticut to make long-term commitments to unaffordable energy. We can't. I mean, we've got to price ourselves back into the marketplace. And the only way to do that relatively quickly, I think, ultimately, is to access some amount of hydroelectric. But that should not stop us from also investing in other alternatives, particularly when we can capture economic market forces to drive down the cost to the greatest extent. Now, people tell me routinely that in 20 years, there'll be no division between alternative energy pricing and current pricing. 20 years is a long time, and we haven't been competitive price-wise with the other states in New England or the rest of the country for the last 20 years. So the idea that we should hold our breath and not be competitive for another 20 years until technologies balance themselves out and the cost becomes the same is a very dangerous proposition. In other words, the last person to be here turn out the lights. So I'm just trying to be realistic about economic growth, which we have not had in this state for 22 years. And when you scratch the surface, you start to understand that we've priced ourselves out of certain job markets, including everything but precision manufacturing. And precision manufacturing itself is a high energy consumer. So there's a NEC report Deloitte, I think, did, which it argues that in certain parts of New England, there's only a 5 to 10% differential with respect to cost as compared to other states. But as soon as you cross the line into Connecticut, where we're paying substantially more than the other states in New England for energy, you'll understand that amount of money grows, or that percentage grows pretty rapidly, and we've got to eliminate it. So it's a balancing act. But the trade-off is, I'm more than happy to go to a higher number in out years. So, and by the way, what I'm also saying is the market should help us make those decisions. So people who have great ideas, who can bring a product online to deliver alternative energy, non-carbon-based energy, quickly to the marketplace, hey, tell me the price. You have it, and you have it, and you have the best ideas. We'll have it. We'll have an auction. You give us our best price, but understand that we've got to take price into consideration if we're going to be competitive with the rest of the nation. Sure. How are you?
Good. What is the state doing to de-bottleneck the natural gas supply coming into the state, which really is a very big issue, I think, for a lot of our power generation?
Well, that's also a very interesting question, and there are a number of proposals, at least 2 proposals that are being publicly talked about improving the out-of-state to in-state delivery of natural gas in high volumes. One of the lines, as you probably know, is taking a lot of natural gas out of Canada from a great distance and bringing it into Connecticut and shooting it down a line with not a lot of storage capacity built into that system. That owner of that line is, I think, taking a very serious look at tapping into other closer sources and feeding the lower portion of that delivery system, say from mid-Connecticut through New York City with Pennsylvania natural gas, as opposed to Canadian natural gas, and continuing to serve the upper portion of that very extensive line with Canadian gas makes sense, particularly since closer delivery will lower the price. So we're going to encourage and work, and that, by the way, that requires about 120-mile additional build-out in other states. Everything that needs to be built is largely built in Connecticut as we speak. Now, if you get a higher volume and an additional source, then you're going to build off of that delivery system as well. So we're having those discussions on an ongoing basis, and I want to see that done. Sure, back there. You, how are you?
Good. You did mention building energy retrofits. We talked about phase here, the last session we had. I think that's an important thing. We've got a very large, older building stock and cogeneration, various things will feed into that, but I think it's a very important element.
I do too. I didn't have it on my list to mention. You guys will touch on it. I'm doing everything I can to make that available. I know you're going to have a speaker who's going to touch on some of the other incentives that the state has built into some of this. One or two more and then I'll get out of here. Sure.
The last session when natural gas was discussed, it was challenged by somebody in the audience as you have acknowledged, not being really, really clean.
Right.
And then it was characterized by the panel as being a bridge fuel. How long is the bridge?
You know, I don't know how long the bridge is, but let me tell you this: that our usage of natural gas in Connecticut represents that to the entire system, and the system is enlarging very quickly. And my luck being what it is, there is no natural resource in Connecticut that I can tax, right? So we're going to bring oil from someplace, or we're going to bring natural gas from someplace, or we're going to bring electricity from some other place outside of the state. Although we do have some generation capacity, clearly, in the state of Connecticut. So we're going to be, we're going to be bringing a lot of different energy into our state. I want the cleanest, the cheapest, and the most reliable. It's my answer to every question, by the way. And I'm going to stick to it. And so you asked a very serious question: how long is it a bridge to? Tell me how long it takes to get other alternatives to be price competitive. Because at 20%, we have some of our states in New England's commitment by 2020 to renewable sources is as low as 5%. We are, I think, 5 or 6% higher than the next state in New England. And I'm doing this from my memory, so if I'm off a percent, you'll forgive me. So we've bitten off a lot. We do not calculate that without recognizing other alternatives, energy sources, that we can get to 20% in any reasonable period of time, certainly not before 2020, which then would require us, under existing state law, to charge ratepayers a $300 million surcharge per year while we're not making that. Now, a $300 million surcharge on electric energy in Connecticut, which currently has the second highest price, is not the way for us to be competitive. So we've got to reset the clock. But, nicely, we have a cleaner, not clean, but a cleaner source. And listen, on certain particulate, particularly sulfur, I mean, there's no comparison. I mean, it's not just a little cleaner, it's a hell of a lot cleaner. It's just not as clean as we'd like it to be. How long the bridge is, I don't know. I think for some states, the bridge is going to be until there's no more natural gas. In a state like ours, the bridge could be 20 or 30 years. But during that period of time, we should be investing in price competitive alternative energy. And by the way, that doesn't mean that we don't pay somewhat more But we can't pay 36 cents a kilowatt hour coming out of Cape Cod. You know, we can't pay 22 or 23 cents for a large portion of our need at a time that we can buy it for 7 cents. And by the way, other states are buying it for 7 cents. And one of our neighboring states, which only has a 5% requirement, even if it bought 36 cents, would be beating the hell out of us on a price structure because they're only buying 5%. So, you know, nobody wants to have a truly honest discussion about this stuff, except I'm trying to lead that. And I'm trying to lead it in a way that we talk about cleaner, cheaper, and more reliable energy in our state. Sure, back there.
Yes, sir. Thanks for coming tonight. I'd like to know, has Connecticut seriously designated natural gas as a Class 1 renewable energy source?
Yeah, no, we've not. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's my misunderstanding.
No.
Thank you.
No, we haven't. Actually, there may be with respect to fuel cell. You know, obviously, natural gas is can be the basis of fuel cell technology, and I think in a very limited case that would apply, particularly in the build out of a smaller grid system. But if you're talking about to a hospital, a high school, whatever. Listen, I visited an ice cream place up in Manchester, I think, that finally hooked up to natural gas. They recovered their cost in 5 months because they cut their cost by over 50%. And up in Woodbridge, Amity school system converted their high school, and their savings is $120,000 a year. It is cheaper, it is cleaner, and we're going to work the hell out of it to make it substantially more reliable. One or two more, and then I promise to get out of here. Yep. Hey, how are you? Good.
My question is about municipalities and municipal buildings, because you mentioned that the state is going to lead the way. New Canaan is now planning a $14.5 million town hall, 33,000 square foot. And at the town council meeting last night, we pushed our architects and said, is solar part of the plan? Is geothermal part of the plan? Tell us about it. And they said, solar is part of the plan because it's politically popular. But we don't expect it's going to make a big difference in the energy usage of a municipal building, and the tax credits aren't there. Imagine the solar may heat the hot water. Geothermal is probably not economically viable. So my question is, so that we can push our architects for municipalities, we don't get the tax benefits as a municipality. So what kind of programs and incentives are we going to have for the municipalities to try and lead the way like the state's doing?
Yeah, first of all, lead. Secondly, I'm going to leave it up to somebody else to tell. I know a lot of this stuff, but on the details of specific programs and incentives, I'm carrying a lot in my head, but I'm not carrying that part of it in my head. So I don't want to misspeak, but you have a panelist who I think can speak to that issue, and I'll ask them to do that. So last question, then I'm gone, and you're free of me.
Thank you for leading.
Although I'm not sure that this is a Republican-dominated audience here in New Canaan. Yeah, well, I figured there were probably more Democrats in this room in New Canaan than in any other room at the current moment.
As our chief energy czar, if you will, I wanted to know if you could also help us lead on the issue of energy efficiency.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Because I know there's the AGS program, but in layman's terms, I want to hear more of the administration and others encourage the public, both on residential, business, and municipal basis, to encourage to first do that energy audit before they size up their solar, their geothermal, their gas needs. If people don't do reducing the need, I think that a lot of our plans are...
Well, listen, the biggest bargain in Connecticut is a home energy audit. It's the biggest bargain. People aren't availing themselves, and particularly in urban environments, are not availing themselves of that. For very little money, we come in, we change every light bulb in the house, and then we tell you all of the other things that you could be doing. Just to change your light bulbs is probably worth it. We are trying to lead by example. Listen, I spent 14 years in the efficiency business as the mayor of Stamford, going after every dollar that was available for efficiency. One of the things I've done as governor is stop rating that account. Even though I had the largest per capita deficit in the nation the day I got elected governor or was sworn in, we stopped rating that account for the purposes of doing this, and we prevented another $1 billion in borrowing, in part to take, which would have required us to take even more money out of the energy bill and out of that fund. So we're doing the best we can under difficult circumstances. I could use a little more national economic growth. I hope someday they'll stop kicking the teeth out of the economy in Washington with cliffs and going off cliffs and coming back cliffs and raising taxes effectively, $1.44 billion on the employee tax, as well as then going to sequester with an additional $85 billion hit to the economy, which in the long term may not be a bad thing, but it's not really helping us grow the economy. But we stopped some bad behaviors, and we are putting tens of millions of dollars additional into efficiency, I can assure you. I've been talking about that for 14 years, and so I tend to talk about the things that I've been doing lately. So listen, it's been great to be with you. You were kind enough to wait. I very much appreciate it, and I apologize, and on to another event. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I promised the committee that we produced the governor, I had to get a picture for our Facebook.
Thank you. Oh, we got our bag over here. Who's? Here first. That's good. Okay. Okay.
Great, thanks.
All right. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're going to cover. You're going to. Whatever I said wrong, don't correct me. All right, just let them think. I'm really smart.
Good man. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you for coming. So let me pick up where I left off, introducing David Bartlett, Vice President, Smarter Physical Infrastructure at IBM. And thank you, David, for being so patient. So on to our next celebrity introduction. I'll try to be quick as I complete the bio here. According to David, buildings consume on a global level 42% of the world's electricity, projected to grow over 50% by 2025. In our big cities like New York, 79% of the carbon footprint is from buildings, yet as much as half of the energy and water in buildings is wasted. The Smarter Planet idea is based on the world now being so highly instrumented, and you'll hear that concept in the next session as well. I'll circle back on the final quiz to that. With the help of big data analytics, we gain deeper insight on how to manage our limited resources far more efficiently. And with that second introduction, I introduce David Bartlett, Vice President, Smarter Physical Infrastructure, IBM.
Thank you so much, and it actually was quite an honor to think I would be the warm-up act for the governor, but the fact that the governor was the warm-up act for me, doesn't get any better than that. So.
It's a great country.
Right. All right, so yeah, and it was really to the last question that was asked. We focused a lot, and do focus a lot, on energy, renewable energy and cleaner energy and more efficiency, but really there's such a big opportunity today to manage what we have, to share what we have in a more responsible manner. For me, it is a mission. Just to date myself, and hopefully a few people remember the ad of when we really got on the pollution campaign back in the 60s. And there was the American Indian with a tear coming out of the eye, right? Oh, thank you. I don't feel so old. Okay. Well, when I walk through a city at night and I see vacant offices with the lights on, or during the day in the summer with the heaters under the desk, or shops in the middle of the summer with the doors open, that makes tears come to my eye. And there's just so much opportunity, and it's really just changing the way we think about the built environment. So I've put together a couple charts here, and this really explains why is IBM in this space. That's what everyone asked me. I mean, I thought IBM was an IT company, but really as was just mentioned, the world has become so highly instrumented. Everything is pushing out digital data now. Even the toaster I bought for my house has a digital readout, and it's got this really cool function to see if the toast is done. It'll come up and then go back down again without missing a beat. But when I go on vacation, I unplug my toaster because I'm worried about the phantom load coming from that unit sitting there with the LEDs always on. So physical assets with IT intelligence, sensors, it's just been a prolific growth in the last decade. So when we talk about efficiency today versus 10 years ago, it's a very different landscape. The amount of wireless network sensors and ability to bring that data wirelessly, just look what you can transmit from your smartphones. Rich media content, moving to 4G. It's just amazing the bandwidth we have today. Machine-to-machine capability, Internet of Things. When the Internet first became a reality, which was not that long ago, it was really connecting people to people, and then it moved to connecting people to information. Well, the big movement today, which is going to have just as dramatic impact as the Internet did for people, is connecting things to the Internet. All this physical built environment is emitting data, and it's being captured by the Internet. And it gives us this really profound opportunity to understand more deeply how the built environment is running and current real-time utilization and opportunities for efficiency gains that we just didn't think were possible in the past. And then, of course, with this, and if you look at the Internet of Things, the estimates are saying we're approaching 1 trillion objects connected to the Internet emitting data. If you combine that with everything else that's going on, this is a big data play. So there was a study done by McKinsey and the Climate Group that said if we could just harness the existing IT communication technology in the built environment to look at this data and help us better understand it, we could avert as much as $341 billion in energy costs and the corresponding carbon footprint that goes along with it between now and the year 2020. So not only is it a huge opportunity, it just makes great business sense. And this is the space that IBM is in. So just a couple of examples to share with you. And since we're in a school, I put this chart up to show schools as a natural starting point, whether universities, high schools, primary schools, to really understand how we can manage differently. Why? Because schools use a lot of energy. Schools are on ever tightening budgets, and there's a lot of creativity and thought leadership that goes on in schools. So one example I'd like to point out is the Los Angeles Unified School District, which is the second largest in this country, and it's 14,000 buildings spread across 700 square miles. Now, their idea was to become the greenest school district in the nation, but how do you do that with 14,000 buildings and an ever-shrinking budget? So, obviously, the more smart sensors you have, the more you can do for efficiencies. But given there wasn't a budget to improve that, and given there were some other interesting things like a statistically significant number of students that now have smartphones K through 12, we equipped the smartphones with an app working with CitySource to create that app and worked with Esri to geotag the app. And all of a sudden, the students become the smart sensors. I mean, when you talk about efficiency, why are we doing this? It's really to create, save energy, but do it in a way that's ensuring no loss in quality of our learning environments, to create productive environments and ones that will serve the purpose. And there's, believe me, the people that work and live and go to school in these buildings are the best judges. Is this environment conducive to productivity, conducive to study? Does it make me feel safe? It's almost like the Maslow pyramid, right, of needs. So what the students are doing is saying, hey, this classroom is way too cold, but I can see that the window's broken there, and it's also a safety issue, so they can correlate some of this. So we've connected their ability to report this directly to the asset management system that the school uses to open up work orders. There's a problem the district had was where the inefficiency is, just understanding that and fixing it took too much time and too much resource. So the students are actually doing it now. And how natural is that for a student to use an app on a phone? And okay, let's take it the next step. Let's gamify it. Who's the best green reporter in the school district? And let's show some visualization. What's the cumulative effect of all the students on this set of buildings, and what difference has that made in total energy savings, or lowering carbon footprint, or increased safety? So it's really created a movement towards thinking differently about our environment and understanding how our own actions can affect efficiency. You know, we do it in our own homes. You know, when our teenager leaves the door open, we yell at them, and you know, we've all been yelled at when we were teenagers. But in large complexes, in businesses and schools and stores, it's not that possible to keep track of all that. So we're enlisting the help of students. Another great example here was in Miami-Dade, and this speaks to the sustainable thought of just better sharing what resources we have. Rather than everyone having to build their own building, what buildings are in place that can be shared with other organizations? So the school there was suffering budget shortfalls. They knew that facilities weren't used at night and weekends. So using the software to understand the patterns and predict when the vacancies would be, match that with the profits and nonprofits, many of which are willing to pay for that space, so they didn't have to build their own facility, and it's generated millions of revenue for them. So again, sharing being a big theme here. We just did a big announcement a couple weeks ago in Boston. I've been working on this project for 2 years there. It's actually around something called the Sustainable Neighborhood Living Lab. And it goes back again to this thought that involving the community, how do you define quality of life? What would you like to see changed? And understanding that built environment in a city neighborhood is not just the buildings, but buildings are a convergence point for the utilities, for transportation, for services such as healthcare. So we looked at a number of these aspects in the city, working with the university as the thought leader in this neighborhood, working with the city of Boston, and even working at a state level. It's just amazing to see really the mind shift, or the paradigm shift of how we think about the built environment, what we can do. It's amazing the findings. We've got the longest contiguous carbon monitoring set up there in any city in the world, and it hasn't been that long. So there's not many cities doing that constant objective carbon monitoring. We've got it on top of buildings, downtown, in the landscaping, in the school settings. And what we found is there's all kinds of natural gas leaks occurring from the very old infrastructure that they weren't aware of. And guess what? You know, that has 10 times the carbon footprint of CO2 from cars. So there's a quality of air issue. So there's just so much to look at in the setting, and so much improvement that can be made. But you know, I love Alex saying, you know, it's not, and the governor saying it's not just about energy; it's energy and the environment. And you know, this is the world that we live in. This is together represents the quality of life that we have and that we're passing on to our children. And one project that is very exciting, one that we started quite a number of years now, is in the Hudson River, which is very close to where I live. And it's using these ideas of the big data by dropping sensors at multiple levels in the river, as well as sensors that move and submergibles, to really understand in real time the river and sources of pollution. And you know, we tend to look at the built environment as well as our ecosystems more statically, but when you start to measure them in real time, you can immediately notice of differences. You establish patterns, and with analytics, you look for the anomalies. And when you see an anomaly, you come up with a set of rules to drive action. And so if there's a new source of pollution, we know about it immediately, and you take action on it immediately. Just like in a building, if we know that all of a sudden there's an anomaly to the pattern of how we're using energy, we look for the source and we correct it, as opposed to waiting for the next preventative maintenance cycle. And this is all out on the internet, but it's a very exciting and grassroots effort as well, but there's a lot of universities involved in this. And the last example that I'll share with you before I turn it over to the next speaker is a project that we've just announced, working with the utility companies to understand, and again, it's, these aren't separate. How do utilities intersect with our communities, and what are we looking for? And, you know, just to repeat, you know, the cheaper, more resilient, cleaner, there's a lot of opportunity here. And this is the project that we're working on with not just one utility, but a number of them. It's kind of a think tank of ways that we, not just from within the state initiative, but as a utility delivers energy, how they can do it in a way where they can restore power quicker, that they can build more resiliency into the system. And there is a lot that can be done on the delivery side. So this is involving not only utilities in this country, but Hydro-Quebec, which is looking at acquiring the utility where I live, but also ones as far out as the Midwest. So it's all these together, I think, that will help us solve this problem. And I'll just leave with a message again, it is the balance. If we want to really create energy independence, the balance is how much opportunity we have to improve efficiency, balanced with how much opportunity we have to create renewables, cleaner sources. Because the lowest carbon footprint isn't from solar, it's not from wind, it's from just saving energy and saving waste. That has the best impact. So thank you, and I'll turn to the next one.
Thank you, David. I'm going to put this tag down so no one's confused.
Oh, and I was the governor.
And for somebody famed as the building whisperer, I think it was pretty easy to hear and understand. To balance the political overtones in the room tonight, I would like to submit that IBM has become quite diplomatic, and from where I sit tonight, I see something that you don't, which is, and if I could share this insight this evening, we started tonight with an IBM ThinkPad, but David and his colleagues uploaded and are managing their PowerPoint on a Macintosh computer. So with that said, I'd like to introduce you all to Andrew Skok. He's Senior Executive for FuelCell Energy in Danbury, Connecticut, where he has over 30 years of experience in many different management positions. And here's an interesting, uplifting anecdote, given all the economic concerns. We are home to some of the largest producers and exporters of fuel cells in the country. And Danbury is actually exporting over $100 million a year in fuel cell equipment to South Korea. So I think that's pretty good to think about, because one of the issues I've always had is with our tax dollars, we're underwriting renewables, specifically solar panels, and the majority of them are made in China. But in this case, we're actually significantly exporting the technology and resources that we're developing here. Areas of focus for Andrew include R&D, first-of-kind demonstration projects, new product development, development of world-class field service groups, sales, business development, and marketing. When I thought about filling this position on the panel, I wasn't sure if I wanted an engineer, a designer, a marketing person, a salesperson, or a lobbyist for the fuel cell industry. And through LinkedIn, I found all in one. So without further ado, Andrew Skok.
Sure.
I'm going to start with the big part of the picture, which is our use of electricity, and it focuses in on distributed generation, which fuel cells are a part of. So I mean, there's power generation right now, most of it comes from wires. Most of us get our power through wires that come from faraway places. You can see there's a list of all the reasons why there are issues associated, or can be issues associated with that. And they're there most of the time, we all rely on it. But the best way to not have a lot of those issues is to have the generation right where you're using the power. And that's what distributed generation is all about. So if you have the power where you're using it, when the telephone pole goes down and the wire goes down because of the storm or the ice storm or whatever, you still have power. That's the concept of distributed generation. And if you add to that a fuel cell, you put it in there, you get the clean part. Struggles a little bit with the cheaper part, but we're getting a lot better at that. And one of the ways to make it even better is cogeneration or CHP. Take that heat. When the power plant is in a remote location, the heat goes up the flue stack and it just goes into the environment and does things which probably aren't so good there as well. But when it's at your location where you're where it's being generated at the site where you're using it, you can take that heat and you can use it to do things that avoid your use of other electricity, of other energy, and you get an overall efficiency which is much greater. That's a really good play when you can put that in with the fuel cell and put it in there. I think that's probably about the best that we're going to get with something like a natural gas. Just a quick side note on that, for those of you that don't know FuelCell Energy, we're an integrated fuel cell company. We do everything from manufacture the fuel cell components in Torrington, Connecticut. As he said, it's well over $100 million a year that we're shipping over to Asia, which is kind of the wrong direction. Most of the stuff's coming in this direction. We're really proud of that. And we're growing and adding jobs in Torrington to help support that as well.
Right
but we do all of the pieces that are required, from building the first part of the fuel cell, we put the pieces together, all the upfront development work and stuff that was done on it too, all the way through getting it out to the site, getting it installed. Installed, up, running, and making those customers have access to that technology. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. On this one, we've sort of talked about that a bit already. The benefits of it, we've talked about them. It's clean, it's got very low emissions, it's very efficient, and as CHP, it's even more efficient. And it's distributed generation, which enables this smart grid thing that you heard about from Alex and we're all starting to hear from. So here's an interesting metric table that I just wanted to throw in for a minute there. What we've done is we sort of ranked a lot of the ways that power is generated and put them on a scale of clean versus efficiency, which is the same as lowering your carbon footprint, lower CO2. The higher the efficiency, the lower the CO2. So where you would like to be is all the way up in the top corner there, and the closer you get to the bottom corner down here, the less sustainable or green or whatever you want to call it you are. So just sort of put some of the different technologies out there so you can see where they fit relative to each other. Here's another way of looking at a similar thing, and let's look at sort of conventional combustion, which is, let's say, these grid plants that are out there that are bringing the power in through the wires. And then you can look at, and this is sort of the old consumer report scale, you know, little circles, whatever circles on that. You can see how you sort of compare wind, solar versus fuel cells. And the big thing that you see right away comes down to the capacity factor. Okay, if you put in a megawatt worth of combustion plants, you get 95% of that worth of kilowatt hours out. If you put a megawatt worth of wind in, depending where it's at, you get somewhere between 20 and 35% of the number of kilowatt hours out. You put solar in, you get somewhere between 15 to 25% there. If you put the fuel cell in, you get 95% of it. You get the same capacity factor that you get from the big plant that's running over there. That has a big effect in terms of space, availability, and the number of kilowatt hours that you get out of one of these in a year. Because at the end of the day, it's really what we all want is kilowatt hours. You don't care about any of the rest of this stuff. I mean, you do, the sustainability part of stuff. At the end of the day, you want the kilowatt hour so that whatever, when you turn the lights on, the lights come on, or the toaster goes up and down like it's supposed to, or all that. But you need those kilowatt hours. That's really what you need. So one of the things I didn't put a slide in here on, but I'll just give you, everyone asks this at every single thing. So what's a fuel cell? Well, the fuel cell's over here. You can see the guy's holding one little cell up here on the side, and that's a big stack, which is what you put together. It makes it like a battery, like the battery in your car. You can basically look at a fuel cell like it's a charged battery when you put a fuel in it. It can be gas, it can be a renewable fuel like biogas, or it can be a lot of other different gases. But if you put that fuel in there, it converts that fuel like a battery does, without any combustion, without any criteria pollutants, very efficiently to give you electricity. Those fuel cell packages are then put into the centerpiece, which is the fuel cell. That's the equivalent of the battery. And then it goes into, you can see, the fuel cell plants, with 300, a 1.5, and a 3,000 kilowatt plant on the side there. So we talked a little bit about that, so that you can take that simple plant, and then to that you can get a lot of different uses out of it. You look at some of the different fuels that you can use. You can use everything up to coal with these fuel cell plants. It's very fuel flexible. You can put all different sorts of fuel in it. Right now, everyone's talking about natural gas, but in the past, we've run them off all of these different fuels, and you can really run them off of any of those fuels. It's really one of the advantages of a fuel cell is they're very fuel flexible. Okay, and then on the other side of it, on the output side, what you take out, you can do everything from generate just electricity to, like we said, you can do CHP, and there are all sorts of other things. That heat that comes out, for the right size fuel cell and the right fit, you can take that heat and turn it into more electricity, which basically makes the efficiency higher because you're getting more kilowatts out of the same amount of fuel. And you can still take heat off of that. So I want to go a little bit about microgrids too. When we talked about microgrids, we did this before we knew what a microgrid was. Back at the 2004 Democratic Convention in Boston, they had a problem. Where they put it, they couldn't get enough power in to run the event. They had all these extra trailers and stuff like that, so they had to do something. So what they ended up doing was putting in a couple of diesel generators and a fuel cell, and formed a microgrid that ran and kept all of these little things over here. You can see satellite links, office trailers, TV studios, a lot of it, temporary media rooms, all of that stuff was run, and none of it was supplied by power from the grid. It all came from power from these. So that's a microgrid. It's what we're talking about, a microgrid. That's an example of one that was done a long time ago. They're a lot more sophisticated now than they used to be. You can see there are a couple that we have here right now. Basically what it does is it ties multiple sources of generation. It doesn't have to be, but it does. It works better if there are multiple sources of generation together. And it manages that generation against the multiple loads that you have on that building. And it basically has to match the generation to the loads that are there and keep it so that you have this little grid that stays up. So when you throw the light switch, the generation ramps up and you get the power to turn the light on. Or the toaster should go. Here's some examples that we use. I'm going to go a little bit more. Central Connecticut State University, it's a really good example. On the West Coast, we've got some out at wastewater treatment facilities. We actually have a jail. The folks out there think it's really, really important that they keep the power on. They don't like it when the power goes off there, so they really put all kinds of generation. They've worked on that. And that one's been around for about 7 or 8 years, too. That's been around for quite a while as well. But this one is the one that's right here, and it really, the timing on this was just about perfect for a microgrid. It actually is a microgrid. But when we did it, we were only first starting to think about microgrids. This went online in December of 2011. You remember in 2011, we had Irene in the summer. We had that really bad snowstorm on Halloween that night. We were actually in the middle of construction when that second snowstorm hit on this plant. It didn't come online until December. But it made its timing really good because it came online just about the time everybody is trying to figure out what are we going to do about a microgrid. And it actually is a microgrid. They've got a couple of generators in there. It uses CHP. They've got steam in the campus that runs around the campus. It enables the campus to stay up and stay running. One of the things I was asked to talk about is some of the other things that you're going to be seeing that fuel cells can do. Those are sort of the applications that we're working on today. But what can these things do tomorrow? And some of the interesting things here that you can see they're doing is we've got a couple of projects, I call them pilot projects, where we're actually generating hydrogen with the fuel cell. There's at the University of California, Irvine, they've got a bunch of fuel cell vehicles and buses that run around, and they actually make the hydrogen with the fuel cell. Besides making electricity, besides making the steam, besides making the heat, they also make hydrogen so that they can fuel their vehicles and keep the fleet of vehicles running. So I think you'll see more of that coming up. You'll see a lot more of these hybrid systems, we call them, systems where the heat is being used to generate more electricity. Because as new types of technology come on that can take that heat and more effectively turn it into additional electricity, that makes the overall system efficiency go up. If you look at those large plants that are off on the distance, they all have multiple systems on them that catch as much of that heat as they can to make more electricity. And in the smaller distributed generation market, that's just starting to happen. Now they're just starting to get those things in to raise the efficiencies. And I think you'll see a lot more of that. And then CO2 One of the things these fuel cells can do is they can take the CO2 out of the environment. So you can take it out. You have to figure out what you want to do with it once you get it out. That's sort of a different problem that folks are working on. But you can use the fuel cell to take the CO2 out, and then if you can find something to do with that prevents it from getting into the air. The CO2 is one of the things people are concerned about, with the greenhouse gas initiative and global warming. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I did it again in true form. I short-shrifted him on the introduction, but suffice it to say that he is highly qualified to be building these very powerful boxes. And so I think we're in good hands with those that have been deployed in the state, and there's a pretty interesting project that he could speak to you about later. I believe it's a 5 megawatt program.
15 megawatts in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
15 megawatts in Bridgeport, Connecticut. So vocabulary, back to that, because you'll have to prove this to me for the 4th session. Fuel cells, electrochemical reaction like a battery, microgrid, and if you're not clear on that, you can circle back to Alex at the end, and distributed generation, generating power at the point of consumption. So those are 3 key vocabulary words for you tonight. And it was interesting, I had a chance to have coffee with Andy before we started, and when he was, before he was 21, I guess he was 19 or 20, he was a junior in college, and he was spending his time at Brookhaven National Labs as an assistant studying fuel cell technology alongside of RIC, a relativistic heavy ion collider that was being developed as a interesting project for renewable energy at the time at Long Island. And so he is highly educated, and his very long resume, forgive me for not reading it, but it includes Harvard University studies, Yale School of Chemical Engineering, and Wilkes College as well. So next speaker, my friend Joseph Camean, Vice President, Principal at Zelm Engineering in Farmington, Connecticut. And he's leading the firm's Power and Utility Practice Group from a power delivery perspective. He began his career as an engineering officer in the U.S. Merchant Marine and U.S. Naval Reserve, followed by construction, startup, and operation of nuclear, fossil, waste-to-energy, and industrial power plants, including serving as a plant manager with E.I. DuPont, holds a Bachelor of Engineering from SUNY Maritime College at Fort Schuyler, and Master of Engineering from Manhattan College, a Connecticut Power and Energy past president, American Society of Mechanical Engineers past section chair, study committee member, and Connecticut Academy of Science and Engineering, now serves on the executive committee of the Northeast Clean Heat and Power Initiative. He's also an adjunct professor, Central Connecticut State University School of Engineering. And let me read this one paragraph, which sort of is my way of describing Joe's position in this world. Joe Camean considers all energy commodities crossing Connecticut's borders as imported foreign energy. He suggests an accurate accounting of imports and utilization efficiencies combined with transparency to an informed public will bring popular support to move away from our obsolete, unintegrated infrastructure and move us towards expansion of renewable energy. If only I had thought of that. With that, Joseph Camean.
Mark, thank you very much. You're too kind. Okay. Well, I'm going to speak about integrated energy infrastructure, which is a serious need here in Connecticut. I'm a naturalized Connecticut Yankee. I grew up in Manhattan, moved to Old Lyme, and my wife's great aunt, who had a farm there going back to like early turn of the 1900s, said, well, welcome, you're now a naturalized Connecticut Yankee. So I think I've got enough experience with the state. I've done quite a bit of engineering practice for energy infrastructure. And I describe what we have as a unintegrated energy free-for-all. Okay? If you look at the state of Connecticut and look at our, oops, I'm sorry about that. I was looking for this thing really goes, doesn't it? Okay, we're back. The laser pointer is that one. Okay. If you look at our state, these magenta colored lines is the gas infrastructure.
And then also on there, if you look, there's a key here, it's a little hard to read, but the light blue is the electric transmission infrastructure. And with policy in Connecticut, the regulation of energy by the policymakers is done in separate silos. So electric is electric, gas is gas. Liquid fuels for transportation, for heating, that's its own bucket. And biomass is starting to emerge a little bit. Part of the biomass equation is what I call urban biomass. So if you look at that map, some of those power generating plants on there are trash to energy resource recovery plants that are making electricity from burning trash, urban biomass. One of the elements of the policy is that you don't even see the energy-water nexus even talked about. It's not even in the lexicon. But the business of making electricity by the current system we use, massive impact on water. If you look at the magnitude of cooling water used by any of the heat engine power plants, and that's different than the fuel cell power plants that are not heat engines, but the unusual thing is the fuel cell efficiencies are no better than the heat engines as far as the prime movers themselves. We'll talk about that later. The sites where the power plants are located, you look at our state's map, you'll see them all along the coast, all along the rivers. Why? To dump heat, to use water cooling. That was the old way of doing business. Since then, the newer ones, such as the clean energy plant in Middletown, is one of the newest plant we've got. That's extracting in the order of 3 million gallons a day out of the Connecticut River and evaporating it, setting it to atmosphere. But it's not coming out of the river, it's coming out of the sand under the river bottom, so therefore it's not taking it out of the river. It is what it is. There is no unified policy about consolidation and intelligently looking at our utility infrastructure. I figured I wouldn't embroil the governor in a discussion about the natural gas expansion, but we're preparing to dig up 900 miles of trenching in a state that's nominally 100-something miles wide by 70 miles high. Wow, that's a lot of excavation. If we're going to open up that much ground, we should be looking at an integrated approach to utilities. I've read the policy, and it kind of pays, a mention to that, but really doesn't have any teeth towards looking at that. And this is a forum, so I'm just throwing it out. I'm not going to pick on Alex. It's not his fault.
We did get a requirement into the governor's bill last year that utilities are required to notify other utilities and fiber optic cable layers and others of that sort when they are doing digging. So that we did get that small victory, but there's no mandate to do something, I guess. That's what we're driving at.
My thoughts are, for example, I live in Old Lyme. I'm tired of the power being out. If we're going to dig up 900 miles of the state's highways and byways, let's put the power wires into the ground at the same time that all these gas pipes are going in. Because all the money's in the excavation and the repaving and the traffic control and so on. So just common sense. The big thing about this, though, is we do not have a Connecticut energy dashboard. And this pays homage to David's efforts through IBM to try to do the metrics. I think of how we use energy. It's analogous to having a car, no odometer, no speedometer, and you just fill up the tank as needed, and if somebody asks you, well, how many miles per gallon does the car get? Gee, I don't know. Well, we have massive inflows of natural gas coming into the state across our borders from the north and from the New York side. We have electric transmission coming in. We have fuel coming into terminals in New Haven and Bridgeport, liquid fuel. And there is no big deal from a technology standpoint with putting the metrics in there to meter this. I proffer that David probably can figure out how to meter how much each of those streams coming in and tie it to the Wall Street COMEX price, so at least you can index and kind of see like a real time how many million BTU of gas are coming in and how many dollars are flying the other way. And the same thing with the Hydro-Quebec electricity or any other streams, fuel oil coming into the port terminals. The second thing is, with deferral to Alex's DEEP, we have unit numbers, this parametric modeling of what are the emissions impact. how much gas you bring in. Even in the relatively clean fuel cells, we're still taking the carbon out of the natural gas, stripping it, we're venting it as CO2 to atmosphere. It doesn't disappear. So I really propose a Connecticut energy dashboard. I've been after this for a long time. I kind of became a true believer along the way. I used to burn all kinds of fuel, back in my plant engineering days. So I've burned pretty much all of it, uranium, coal, heavy oil, and all of the above. And I also am concerned about the hereafter. If there really is one, I don't want to go to the wrong place. So we want to clean it up. So, okay, separate heat and power. Our whole backbone circulates around separate heat and power because electricity is electricity. So when the Clean Energy Project got built, it's a separate heat and power plant. Now, this is not a picture of the Clean Energy plant, but it's a clone because these are cookie cutter type projects. 2 gas turbines and heat recovery boilers, and a big cooling tower, which if you notice in the wintertime, you see all that evaporated water becomes very visible. For you guys down in the downstate area of Connecticut, that's the Bridgeport trash plant that's off of I-95. It's normally surrounded, particularly on certain cold, kind of foggy days, in this giant cloud of vapor. And before we go and run the 900 miles of gas pipe, the amount of heat coming out of these facilities, and this is sad because this is not the Clean Energy plant. They have no pictures of that plant anywhere. There is an artist rendering, but anyway, the reality is that there's enough heat coming out of this plant in Bridgeport that we're venting to atmosphere. You could heat the entirety of Bridgeport, the whole municipal concentration of Bridgeport. There's 800 million BTU an hour getting dumped there. And I say we shouldn't be importing the natural gas, but it's an interim measure. Oh, by the way, just very important. The national average, 2/3 of our fuel made to go to electricity, 2/3 of that goes off as waste heat, just like this. And you have like Millstone, you don't see the plume because we're killing the fish in Long Island Sound, or the Hartford trash plant is sending 600 million BTU into the Connecticut River. Hartford, whole heating system, peak day, something between 270 and 300 million BTU an hour. We're dumping 600 million BTU an hour. It's 1.5 miles from the downtown. We can't run that pipe though. Good question, huh? So the U.S. U.S. Energy Information Administration, they have a website, EIA.gov. I'm sure David's familiar with it. I want that, it's like, has it go, think globally, act locally. I want us to have our own website so we can transparently see what's going on and the magnitudes of these losses. I think an informed, educated public can take care of the rest, don't need me. Okay, separate heat and power, spending big capital on what I call heat wasting equipment. If you look at that Clean Energy Project, this is the artist rendering. What you see in there, that air-cooled cooling tower is a giant heat wasting machine. That project was $1.6 billion to build that separate heat and power plant. And that cooling tower and the very convoluted system to extract water from the aquifer, not from the Connecticut River, even though all the pipes are right in the sand under the river. I'm sure that of that 1.6 million we do in accounting, and it's probably umpty-ump hundreds of millions of dollars spent on infrastructure to throw heat away. A particularly egregious one, and I only pulled this one because it's just such a sad story. This is the largest fossil power plant in New England. It's the Brayton Point Station in Somerset, Mass. And I kind of was surprised to see these monstrous cooling towers, giant heat wasting machines. The owner, which is Dominion, same people that owns Millstone, spent $570 million to put in this new heat wasting system because they were sterilizing Mount Hope Bay with all the thermal plume from the plant, and they had to stop doing that. And I look and I say, gee, you spent $570 million to throw away heat. They ultimately just did a walk away and they just sold this plant to a bunch of investors in New Jersey who are probably going to convert all of it to burn natural gas and get out of the coal business, my thoughts. But if you look at the efficiencies, if we take even the newest, clean energy is ostensibly between 55 and 60% of the fuel going in becomes electricity. The remainder is going out of that cooling tower and a little bit up the stacks. So for a separate heat and power plant, the theoretical best right now is 60%. General Electric and Siemens are embroiled in a battle to see if they can break the 60% barrier. Most of the old junk, stuff like this, which we do still have some of these around Connecticut, the old 76 they were called, the worst of them is around 28%. We shouldn't be burning not one bit of natural gas on those anymore. Now, if we do combined, CHP means combined heat and power. It means taking the heat and using it. For combined heat and power installations, the best can exceed 90%. It doesn't matter if it's a gas turbine, a reciprocating engine, a fuel cell, any of these prime movers that are converting fuel, you can get over 90% utilization of fuel. Even the worst are somewhere nominally around 60% for any system that an engineer wouldn't be ashamed to provide. Okay, well, in my merchant marine days, I got to travel quite a bit, and I did the whole Baltic Sea circuit, and I remember going to Denmark and seeing these giant pipes all over the place, and they were above ground. And you know, I went to some of the local watering holes and was drinking the akvavit with the herring, and it was really good. And I asked, what are these pipes for? And they all knew about it. There was a lot of public knowledge about what they did. And what they did was, in the energy crisis in the 70s, Denmark was 90% dependent on imported energy. And by the way, they were sympathetic to Israel, so the OPEC countries that weren't very kind towards Israel shut the valve off completely. Denmark was put into an economic nightmare. Their whole society shut down. The public, of course, there was a big uproar. They blamed all the government guys. Guys like Alex got beat over the head. But guess what? They did something about it. So the first thing they did was, you know that trash plant in Bridgeport that's 2 miles from the downtown? They ran pipes out now instead of sending the 800 million BTUs to the sky. And they started looking at the coal power plants and any kind of power plant that they had and said, can we run pipes out? And if you look at this scale here, that's 10 kilometers. So anybody who runs, that's like 6.4 miles, I think, something like that. So if you look at this system, this is not a lot different than things we could do in Connecticut. This is kind of a metropolitan center of Connecticut. So right now, Denmark is getting something in the order of 50% of their domestic heating for their dwellings is coming from just the heat from the trash incinerators, because they run continuously, because we make garbage every day and have to get rid of it. And different argument about burn plants, whether we should or we shouldn't. However, after they centralized and started all this distribution, and they were at least, they kind of cut the bleeding, because now instead of, and by the way, in the 70s, they were sort of in the order of like us. They were 33% fuel to electric conversion, so they were throwing away 2/3 of the heat. And they realized, gee, we shouldn't be moving heat 20, 30 kilometers even though we can. It's kind of dumb. So they started decentralizing. So look at this. Here's Denmark in the mid-'80s. These centralized plants were piped out to districts and distributing energy. But now, look at Denmark. Looks like they got the measles. And what is this? This is all decentralized combined heat and power plants, because they do not burn fuel without getting up to like 90% use of the fuel. And the other thing you'll see, some of the measles on here are green. Those are wind power plants. And this is all done at a community level. This is crazy guys like me in Old Lyme, where I'm Economic Development Commissioner, wanting to do small wind, wanting to do tidal energy, wanting to do solar. And they're doing it. So I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I've actually advocated, Alex, if you want to go to Denmark and take notes, I advocate that my tax dollars can be paid for a trip by selected DEP people that take good notes to go there and learn.
I don't think the government would let me get away with that.
I know, no akvavit heroin. But then it gets even better. As they continued to have these community energy systems, what happened? Look at this. Now, you see the orange? These are operating solar district heating. Homegrown. They make this stuff over there. See, we're putting in solar photovoltaics at fantastic prices and importing it all from China. What's wrong with this picture? And meanwhile, their planning is moving on to do more of them. And this is a particularly cool project. I don't have much reason to go over there unless I go on vacation nowadays, but I'd love to see this. In Marstal, Denmark, they have a solar district energy system. And what they did, this must have been a farmer that I suspect, like over here, he couldn't get the government to pay him not to grow something anymore. So, so when that happened, there was probably, a smart guy like Mark that understands how to work systems and do the right thing, figured out, okay, Farmer Olafson, or his name was probably Anders. I remember going over there and meeting guys that was like Anders, and Anders. Like, don't you guys have any originality? But they got Anders over here to sell his farm, and the district energy company built a solar collector array. It's pretty big. And what's this funny looking white thing over here? That's a thermal accumulator. It's like a battery, just that it's a tank. It stores the heat. Sun shines during the day, doesn't shine at night. And there are times during the year where maybe they overproduce during the day and they can fill that storage tank up and stretch it a little bit longer. The secret to renewable energy has everything to do with energy storage. And I see it coming. And there's a lot going on right now in that arena, and I'm very interested in it because it's the key. That's something we should be investing our efforts at that we're not even looking at, I think. Could be wrong. Good, Alex.
We are, and we're not talking about thermal storage here, but we are soon going to announce the state of Connecticut is partnering with the University of Connecticut and Fraunhofer Institute from Germany to open a research center at the University of Connecticut that will be focusing on battery storage technologies.
Cool. Well, we've got the electrochemical people around town. One of them's right there. But anyway, the Marstal, Denmark project, they've got 1,500 customers, so this isn't a whole lot different. I mean, I know in the town of Old Lyme, we've got something like 5,000 electric meters. I would say that kind of probably represents a pretty good count on how many customers there are in Old Lyme. And so 1,500, it's not as big as major metropolis like Old Lyme, but the point is they're getting 50% of their space heating from solar thermal, and they're picking up the rest of it from locally produced biomass, typically straw that they're growing almost like hay bales, and I think that's pretty neat. I think it beats the hell out of importing stuff over the border. And I'll close off by saying that they were doing that in Denmark, and I was trying to figure out, we're probably, they're colder than we are, but that means it should work over here. And I found a place that was even more interesting. This is a residential housing development in Drake's Landing, Okotoks, Alberta, Canada. It's a solar thermal project where they're picking up 90% of their space heating. They're storing it in the ground. What they're doing is all summer long, they're storing it in the ground. And then obviously in the daytime, if the sun is shining, they're using it and they're pulling from storage. They are running heat pumps on the storage cycle, but they're getting 90% of their space heating from solar thermal in Alberta, Canada. So, 5,199 heating degree days per year. Heating degree days depends where you are and what the balance point temperatures are. And there's probably, I don't do the building side work, my partners do that. I do the supply side, but I think Connecticut's around like 3,000 heating degree days per year. Like a 55-degree balance point. So if they can do it, we can do it. Thank you very much.
So do you think Joe's qualified? Well, despite the perceived tension between Joe and Alex, I actually met Joe at an event that where he was a guest of Alex, that Alex was hosting.
Alex is doing the right stuff.
Thanks, Joe.
So anyway, I wanted to thank you all for coming. I wanted to do a round of applause to thank our speakers tonight. We've certainly produced a brain trust here in front of you that's not just regional, but of international qualification. I'd like to preserve time for 3 or 4 really good questions, and then I'll let you all go home. In the front?
I think there was an underlying thought that wasn't brought up, that those 900 miles of digging could be a district heating system. That wasn't directly...
I love it when I see smart people in the audience. Right on. Right on.
Listen, we're not against... We don't go into policy making with assumptions other than what other than data. So if the data bears it out, it should be done. If it doesn't, it shouldn't be done. It's that simple. This isn't, and even and Joe knows that this is the case. It's not as simple as saying, okay, let's do 900 miles of district heating across the state. There may be places where that will work, maybe places where it won't. But I'm not going to be a bureaucrat here dumping cold water on the idea. It seems like a good idea. It's just how the data bears out.
In 1993, I mentored graduate students at University of Hartford School of Engineering. We put together a district heating system for the state of Connecticut from Millstone. And at that time, Millstone had 3 operating units. They're still dumping in the order of 10 billion BTU an hour. You could heat the entire state of Connecticut from Millstone, except I'm now of a mind we need to get the heck off of the uranium light water cycle, big time. There's other nuclear cycles, but not that one.
Yes, then.
I'd like to ask Joe, in Denmark, what is the medium that they're using to transmit the heat? Is it steam or is it water?
No, predominantly low temperature water. What they've done is they've gone to very low temperature water so they can use solar energy to heat. If you had an old building, like my wife's great aunt's farmhouse, built in 1800, the wind whistles through it. It's like trying to heat a river of air. So what they've done is they've tightened up their building envelopes. You don't need 250-degree radiators to heat a place that the wind's not whistling through. So you can do it with 120, 140-degree water.
Chris?
Is cogeneration significantly more expensive than wasting that heat into the air or into the water?
I feel that at the appropriate scale, it's probably cheaper. The dilemma that we have is small-scale cogen, very hard to justify.
Yep.
The fuel cell boys are seeing that problem big time. It's like 2 to 3 times the price. I advocate that these community energy systems should be a little bigger, where it's like a whole town rather than 20 buildings, each one with a little micro generator in it.
Joe's right on the scale part. Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, Central Connecticut State University is a good example. They've got a district heating system that runs across the entire university. So that is exactly the kind of system he's talking about, not for the whole state, it's on a smaller area. You look at his charts where they're taking that down to smaller and smaller areas, that's a reasonable size to do it on. And if you look at that, that system, the heat from that system saves them about 1 or 2 cents on their electric cost. So it basically buys down their electric cost by about 2 cents.
And it is all about scale, Chris. Joe's exactly right. There are places where it does work even on a small scale, where you can capture the waste heat and it's very beneficial. And then there are places where you're told it's uneconomic and it just breaks your heart. The Connecticut Valley Hospital campus is a great example of that. You see that energy going in the air, and you see the buildings around it, and you say to yourself, why can't that work? And there's just a couple of reasons that we're trying to get around, but that make it uneconomic. So it's heartbreaking sometimes.
Bruce Hampson?
Alex, on microgrid, can the network for a microgrid cross a street? Allow that, do they?
They don't. Well, they do. They allow it, but they have to own the distribution system.
They have to own the distribution.
Right. So it's we've managed to skirt around it. Skirt was not the word I wanted to use there, but it was the one that came out of my mouth, unfortunately. We managed to sort of dance around it in this initial round of microgrid funding, but it is a bigger scale issue that we're going to have to be addressing, which is the ability to own distribution lines within the context of a microgrid. The utilities hate it, but we don't really, we don't make policy based on how the utilities feel. We make policy based on what's best for the state.
And number two, what exactly are the incentives or the grants that the microgrid program provides to a possible project?
Sure, and I apologize for not saying that earlier. I was a bit harebrained in my explanation there. But we have a $15 million pot of money available for funding projects. We think we're going to come to about 10 or 12 projects when this first initial round is over. And that money can be used to pay for any cost except for generation. And that is per the authorizing legislation. So we really do have legally, we have our hands tied in terms of not being able to pay for generation. But we've been working with our partners in the fuel cell industry. We've been working with our friends in other areas of generation to come up with creative financing mechanisms. And we're also working on a longer-term program through our Clean Energy Finance and Investment Authority that is focused around financing fuel cells and other types of generation that would be put into microgrids, because we can't use the funding for generation this time around, but you heard the governor talking. I think he's pretty eager to see the next couple rounds, and I think the legislators are going to see the proof of concept and already probably have that we need to push it forward. I can't speak for them, but yeah.
And for the audience, benefit of the audience, those two questions came from Bruce Hampson, and he's chairman of the Wilton Energy Commission, which is really a model organization in Fairfield County.
Bruce is a legend.
So he should be up here, and hopefully he will next time.
Yeah, Mark, can I just plug in a clarification to that one on the microgrid question? Alex, unless I'm mistaken, I believe the intent of the microgrid legislation includes for the electric utility to set up separating switches such that their infrastructure delivers the power.
That's correct.
Correct.
Yes.
So that is the intent. My concern is that you're going to see a bill that's going to look like you're hooking up Millstone.
John Harbaugh?
Let me say one more thing about that. It's to the utilities' credit. They have worked with us very closely on this microgrid program, and I have no complaints about the personal interactions. The overall regulatory atmosphere can be bumpy, but I think you have a governor who's not interested in seeing people getting hosed in the microgrids, and I think you see utilities that are not interested in pissing off that governor because he can get angry.
Okay.
And John Hartwell is a trustee of Earth Place in Westport, Connecticut.
We talked earlier about the bill to make it possible to extend gas lines with longer term financing. The governor seemed optimistic that would pass. Can you tell us what's the bill number, where is it going, and who should we be talking to, and who's on the other side?
All right. The bill number is 6360. It's the governor's bill moving forward. Representative Steinberg, I got that right, don't I? We haven't switched it up lately, have we?
But the financing for some of it may be financed.
That's right. So there may be separate pieces. But if you tell your legislator to support the governor's energy package, you're guaranteed that they'll know what you're talking about.
Representative Steinberg is my legislator.
There you go.
All right.
This is
talk about good representation.
Yeah.
The question in the back.
Yeah. My name is Dan Donovan, and I just wanted to address Joe. We developed a Plainfield Renewables energy project. It's 37 megawatts in class 1, and that's coming up in October. So that's from the project 150 programs. So we're very happy to get that project done. But we've gone to another area, and it's actually taking the heat from the wheel-braided plant and using that in a downtown low temperature thermal loop. And we have the KEYNOTE group out of Denmark, the world famous KEYNOTE group that does these types of things. And we're being supported by wheel-braider FuelCell Energy and also the Connecticut Clean Energy Concept.
Great.
So we're trying to make an advance.
Great.
It's progress. And Mark, can I interject just before we get to the next question? The governor did promise that I would give 2 pieces of follow-up, and I would probably be fired if I didn't. So let me just tell you precisely. There was a question about natural gas incentives, what exactly they were, specifically in the bill. The biggies you probably want to know about. There is this $500 tax credit for off-main customers who take advantage of or indicate interest to their utilities in converting their fuel supply, and that the intent of that is to aggregate demand. So we need to be able to know where the pressure points are in the pockets with the most folks, so we can do our planning in the best way possible. There is the hurdle rate change that the governor talked about. It's being proposed in legislation at 25 years. To be moved up to 25 years in terms of a payback period. And there are also financing pieces to all of this. Our CEFIA, our green bank, is just about to pull the trigger on a somewhat pilot program called the Smart E Loan, which is low-cost financing for energy efficiency, clean energy, and natural gas conversions. And I think you can expect to see that expanded if it meets with the success we expect it to. And there's also provisions for on-bill financing in the package that are very attractive. And then the governor also asked me to talk about lead by example incentives. I think, and forgive me, it's been a long day, but somebody was asking about incentives for what we're doing for our state building energy efficiency work. We've committed over $10 million to 44 different projects across state buildings, and that has an average payback period of under 6 years. And we also have developed a performance contracting program, which works with municipalities and state agencies, and we actually took our first big step just this past week, and issued a letter of intent from 3 agencies, the City of Bristol, the Connecticut Valley Hospital campus, and the Department of Corrections moving forward, and I anticipate a great deal more going forward. Sorry to jump that on you, but I have to cover
Before the last question, and thank you for that, 3 points of information. One is that David Bartlett's contract with the Green Building Council, you may not be aware of this, but it does require him to produce at least 3 or 4 autographs tonight as a whisperer, so you can bring that home to your family and children. And I believe that Andy is taking orders for his fuel cells. So before the last question, the last thing I'd like to remind you is that May 24th is a Wednesday, and the evening of May 24th, we're going to have our 3rd program, Building Energy Now. Yes, Judy? What's that? April. It's April. And by the way, that's Judy Swan. She's the executive director. So I'm going to take her word for it. April 24th is our next program, Building Energy Now. It will be at the New Canaan Nature Center. And I promise you a lot of takeaways and self-help. We're focusing back to our roots as the Green Homes Committee. We're focusing on homes, what you could do to improve, renovate, and build new. And with that, April 24th, at New Canaan Nature Center, I will take the last question.
My question is for Andy. It seems like you have an ideal form of energy. How come all the politicians have not rushed into embracing that?
Well, I think they have. I mean, this state in particular. Well, no, they have. I mean, fuel cells, one of the gentlemen asked the questions on that, but I mean, fuel cells qualify for federal investment tax credits just like the solar folks do on that. So, I mean, they've recognized that. Many of the states have additional subsidies which actually allow these things to come in and save people money, which is drawing them into the market. It just takes a long time to, the number of gigawatts of electricity that's produced and consumed in this country is huge. It takes a long time to get any substantial percentage of that, and we have been. Could there be more? Absolutely. There always could be better support for that, but I think the support has been very strong.
Would it be fair to say that that form of energy would produce the smallest amount of carbon footprint? So we wouldn't have to worry about fracking?
It can. It depends on how you do that. I mean, we've got units that run off anaerobic digester gas that come out of wastewater treatment facilities, which basically end up with almost no carbon footprint because that carbon is going to end up in the atmosphere anyhow on there. So there are ways to look at it like that. And even at a place like, I keep going back to Central Connecticut State University, I mean, the unit that is in there is actually reducing their carbon footprint by over 4,000 tons per year of CO2, even though it's running off natural gas. So it is moving in the right direction, and I think that's what we're talking about, the bridge. It's getting us there. It isn't going to get it to zero, but it can get it a lot better than it is today.
Well, thank you all for coming and sharing my enthusiasm for these topics. For your very thoughtful questions. Please come up afterwards and meet the panelists, and hope to see you all again next month.